Y antes de empezar en español, ¿me escuchan? Antes de empezar, esta es la conclusión de un camino largo que empezó hace muchos años. Yo quiero tener un recuerdo para un amigo muy entrañable que fue el que me invitó por primera vez a FAAPI y lamentablemente le fallé, que fue Daniel Fernández. Entonces, Daniel, and secondly, I want to thank Macmillan for helping FAAPI bring me over. When I was invited in early this year, we had to work hard to get me here. And well, they asked me, for your plenary, can you do something inspirational? And oh my God. They had me working since January up to about 10 minutes ago. So what I'm going to share with you, I hope you like. And I think it will encapsulate a little bit of the spirit of what we've shared. In my case, in this past 5 days, I was privileged enough to be able to work with teachers in the linguistic programs in the city of Buenos Aires and in the province of Buenos Aires, seeing real schools, real lives, and hopefully what I'm going to try and share with you in this 50 minutes is going to be akin to that spirit. But before I start, thank you very much, FAAPI. We've had a wonderful time. It's been a great conference. So can we give the FAAPI and APIVA teams a huge hand. Perfect hosts. So I decided to call this talk. This is going to be a talk. Leonardos in the language classroom, or a renaissance for teachers. Why? Well, let's see. Is this what you see on a daily basis in your classrooms? Yeah. Even if you are the best teacher that has ever existed, you are going to have students who fall asleep in your classes, students who get bored in your with your lessons, students who are talking to one another. Now they are texting as well, right? Now, this is not a unique situation to the English language classroom. I mean, regular subject teachers complain about the same thing, right? There seems to be a global trend that the purpose of teachers is somehow to endure the whimsical nature of our students, and in doing so attempt to teach something. Because this is such a pervasive reality. Our educational systems, God bless them, implement this wonderful strategy. It's the only one they have learned over the years to implement. And can you guess what strategy that is? Change, right? So every year or every 2 years or every 3 or 4, depending on how often we have elections, we have new reforms that claim that now, yes, we're going to get it right this time. Right? We're going to get it right this time. And my question is, are they? If one looks at the history of education, we can go back 100 years, right? Almost 100 years, and find the same rhetoric, the same kind of endeavor, right? Preparing this talk, I tried to do a little bit of an internet search on educational reforms. And look at this. This is from 1916, right? It has the date there. It's the reviewing committee on the national curriculum reform for England. Guess what? They are still discussing it, right? And if you're familiar with Harry Potter, you might have seen this in the Daily Prophet. And we all know what that reform ended up in, right? Voldemort came back. So the only certainty that we have nowadays is that whatever our future is going to involve change ahead, right? Now, this is not something nice for teachers because we are at the bottom of the pile. And in general, we are just told that something needs changing most of the times because it's our fault, right? It's the teachers who cannot teach. It's the teachers who do not implement these beautifully written curricula that we send them in hefty bundles with all the prescriptions of you should do this, you should do that, you must do this, you must do that. And those things don't work, right? And who's to blame? Teachers are to blame, right? I like this Lao Tzu quote because I think it encapsulates a little bit what I'm trying to convey. And it says, if you do not change the direction, you may end up where you're heading, right? And in my experience working in a lot of Latin American countries, the tone of reforms has always been the same, right? We always start with very good intentions and we end up somewhere where we don't want to be, but we were heading that way. And people kept telling along the way, mind you, you're going in the wrong direction, but nobody listens. Look at some of the educational changes we've had. When we started with the schools and the slate, remember? Single-sex schools, girls in one room, boys in the other. That is the early 20th century. Look at the mid-20th century, 1960s, right? We have co-education. Boys on the left, girls on the right, right? And if we look at a classroom nowadays, it may look a little bit more distended, but look at the structure. Look at the discoursal arrangement of the space. Always the same, right? In one wonderful panel I was privileged to be part of right before this presentation, I quoted somebody I cannot remember the name of, right? Who said that, sorry if you were there are 3 social institutions that are difficult to change, which are the church, the army, and education. And guess what? The church and the army have changed, right? So, in general, the way we teachers experience this reality is as a series of, another change, right? But before we move on, let me offer some facts to you. It's true that educational change wants to respond to powerful social forces that are affecting the actual fabric of who we are as a nation, right? And I don't doubt that educational reformers have at heart the best intentions to strengthen that fabric that at times seems to be too worn out for our liking, particularly when our children fall through the cracks in the fabric. But in a presentation that a colleague of mine from Uruguay gave in 2007, Denise Vaillant mentioned that, and I'm going to quote her directly if you don't mind. She says that the lack of effectiveness of educational reforms is due to the teacher's lack of knowledge, and she uses the word cluelessness, due to insufficient teacher preparation, lack of training to face the new challenges posed by evolving social changes, and the persistence of inadequate routines which prove unsuitable to the present circumstances. No wonder that teachers grumble about their job, and grumbling about how things are is just the beginning. And basically it's something like this, right? We start by grumbling about our professional development situation, because most of the reforms is true. You look at the documents, right? When they talk about teacher development, it's the teachers need to be fixed, right? For this to work. The grumbling is just the beginning. that leads to some sort of griping about specific frustrations, and we complain a lot, and we walk in the staff room, we say, have you seen the latest document, right? And from there, we try to grope around like, how do I do it? How do I do it? What do they want from me, right? And then you grasp something, but not the whole picture. And from there, you go to gripping something tight, that is, this is my certainty today, only to find out they have to start grappling again because you got it wrong, right? The way I understood the document is not the way my colleagues. And this, which looks like a cycle, can become very easily a vicious circle. A vicious circle that has important consequences. Teachers leaving the profession. Students sort of adrift in this sea of understanding of how things need to be done. So when one looks at this situation, I just wondered, what would happen to a real genius in a classroom nowadays? And to me, the quintessential genius is Leonardo da Vinci, right? That's why the name of the plenary. Would Leonardo survive in our classrooms today? Mind you, he was a very resourceful guy, extremely resourceful. I remember one of my first Italian lessons that was called Leonardo da Vinci era anche pittore. Leonardo da Vinci was also a painter, right? In fact, Leonardo was an artist, but he was also an architect. You know that. He was an engineer. He was... Thank you very much. He was an activist. Right? He was a party organizer. Did you know that? Yeah, he was an event planner. And he was also a strategist. He designed amazing strategies for the different kingdoms he worked for to win wars, right? So basically, all these roles are very similar to what we do in the classroom. Let's look at some of our jobs. We, in a very artful way, design learning experiences for our students. We are constantly planning and replanning and looking for that technique or that hue or that shadow that will add depth to whatever we do in the classroom. We build bridges. We are architects of students' learning. We know that learning can happen on our own, right? But what we do best in the classroom is to create these wonderful scaffolds that bring learning up. We build bridges between our students, the mandates of the systems, and real life. We advocate for our students because if you've heard things around this conference, and you go to other conferences and the word student, and it's all about the children, they are always at the center of our discourse. We use the unions to fight for a salary, but the professional events are all about the kids. Well, who can deny that we are event organizers? I like it when principals say, we're going to have a wonderful festival, you go ahead and organize it, right? And then, of course, we strategize collectively with our colleagues, right, about how to best improve the conditions we work in, our students learn in. So, a teacher is a Leonardo, or at least we possess the qualities to become a Leonardo. There's one of those airport books that I once read, and I was telling one of my colleagues, this plenary is not going to be scientifically based. It's based on a book I read between two cities that was cheap because it was a paperback. And the book is called How to Think Like Leonardo da Vinci. How to think like Leonardo da Vinci. I said, I could learn that. I'm going from New York to Portland. I could read that. And basically, what the book does is the author analyzes the principles that Leonardo upheld throughout his life. Now, mind you, we have to acknowledge that Leonardo was also the quintessential procrastinator, right? He would get money for projects, start them, never finish them. I don't know if there's a Showtime series called The Borgias. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's very funny because whenever there is a mention to Leonardo in that series, they show like half a statue, half a painting. It's really, really funny, right? So let's see what are the 7 habits of mind that Leonardo embodied, and how we can draw a parallelism between those habits and what we do as teachers, right? So the first thing he lived, the whole thing is, in the same way that Lao Tzu warned us, right, that if we don't change direction, we end up where we are today. Unless we look for a way out, we are going to end up here, right? So let's look at some of the characteristics that Leonardo used throughout his life. Curiosità is the first one, curiosity, okay? What is curiosità? And let's see if I'm going to read the definition, and if you identify yourself with it, could you stand up, right? It says it's an insatiable insatiable curious approach to life, and an unrelenting quest for continuous learning. Yeah, stand up. You know why you are here? For that same reason, right? Now, our profession has a long history of change. Changes in methods, changes in paradigms. What worked 20 years ago seems not to work nowadays, but then somebody's using it and it's still working. Now, we spend our teacher education, our formative years as a professional, and our professors' main task is for us to pack up all the knowledge that we can, right? Pack it up. And then when we try to explain how we do things, we need to unpack that knowledge. And is that easy? I've always had a very particular rapport with the worst students in the class, because I was one of the worst students in my class. I have attention deficit disorder with hyperactivity. In the days when I was a kid, I had a brain lesion. That is what my doctor told my parents. And thank God the doctor knew nothing about Ritalin, so I was never medicated. Thank God, yeah. Thank you for the ignorance of my doctor, something I never thought I would say. But somehow I related very well to those kids because I knew what made them tick. And as soon as they started fidgeting in the seat, I did something active so they could stand up and stretch. And then people would say, we would have teachers' meetings in Uruguay, where every teacher gives the grade for every student they have. And when everybody was giving those students 1, 2, I was giving them like 8, 9, 10. And of course they said, oh yeah, you're an English teacher. You're all about fun and games and videos and songs, right? But then the principal, one particular principal, very particular principal, after the second teachers' meeting, started patrolling the hallway outside my classroom whenever I was teaching. And we have high schools in Uruguay that have the little window. So it was like having Big Brother watching me, literally. And there were very bizarre things, like I asked for a tape recorder, right? And he said, what do you need a tape recorder for? You are not a music teacher. So, well, I use these things called cassettes that play the dialogues. Do you really need that? And then after 2 or 3 weeks of patrolling, because of course I was young, right, and not to be trusted, he literally saw that kids were working in my class. We were having fun at times, but at times the worst students were head down doing activities. So my biggest moment was when I came out of the classroom. He said, the principal wants to talk to you. So I went into the principal's office, flashback to high school. And She looked at me and said, okay, how do you do it? Right? And honestly, I had a hard time articulating how I did it. It was all at the intuitive level. And that led me to really become curious about, who am I? Do I need therapy? What am I going to do from now on? But it led to a wonderfully fruitful conversation with a literature teacher, Spanish literature, and a history teacher that led me to do a lot of research in those days on what learning styles were, because I thought naively that it was all a matter of learning styles. And no, it's a matter of what? I was perennially curious. I was looking at my students. I was trying to feel the way they were acting and reacting to my teaching. And I was trying to adapt. I drove other students crazy. Because of my hyperactivity disorder, I walk around the classroom compulsively. And I had one student who once told me, could you please stop? Stand somewhere where I can see your lips. I don't know, I cannot see what you're saying, right? Now, curiosità means then that quest. But it needs to be disciplined. We cannot just go about like, okay, let's find out what I'm doing right, what I'm doing wrong. Because we may end up like, have you ever moved? I moved like 20 times in my life. I hate moving, right? The worst thing is unpacking the boxes and putting things in the right place. So we need to find a way to, in a very disciplined way, go about this quest for understanding, right? One of my professors at the University of Bath, who's an expert in mentoring, has this wonderful quote in one of her books, where she says, before we can share what we do, we need to be able to know what we are doing to make the implicit things we do explicit, right? So maybe looking at another one of Leonardo's habits of mind may help us, and that one is dimostrazione, a demonstration. The key word here goes from thinking to doing, right? Thinking to doing. Gell, who's the author of How to Think Like Leonardo da Vinci, defines dimostrazione as any thinking that leads to purposeful action. It's a commitment to test knowledge through experience, persistence, and a willingness to learn from that experience, right? So it's not just saying, I'm going to try something out today in the classroom and let's see how it works, right? There has to be a commitment to taking action. Principal action is very similar to Freire's concept of praxis, right? So, dimostrazione and you. The framework that I have found most effective is not a new framework for dimostrazione as my own professional development. I try to engage in what is called, sorry, do you ever watch a show here called Miranda? It's a British TV show. Yeah, I'm not Miranda's mom. She says like, this is what I call a computer, right? Now, it's not what I call, but what has been termed experiential learning. And it's a little bit of professional deformation, if you wish. I work at a university that was founded by John Dewey in 1919. So we are the home of experiential learning. Most of our courses are experientially based. But when I came to that university, I said, I'm in paradise because this is my place, what I've been doing all these years. And experiential learning is a principled approach that I have found very effective, particularly working with aspiring teachers, people with very little classroom experience, or who are getting their hands dirty with teaching, as a framework to help us go through our community building and our negotiation and reification of meaning and knowledge. And I'm not going to bore you with this. You know the steps of experiential learning. But it starts with an experience. It starts with doing. Then we reflect, we derive principles, and then all those things are applied to future experiences. And if you ever read Experience and Education by John Dewey in 1934, he has this beautiful principle called the continuum of experience. What he says is every experience that we have significantly alters the way that we perceive our past experiences, but more importantly, the way we're going to perceive our future experiences, right? So as a teacher in development, in the middle of high-stakes change processes, and the way Latin America is moving now, they are evaluating us now, right? I don't know if it is the reality in Argentina, but in many countries in Latin America, teachers have had to sit for language examinations to ascertain that they know English. Ecuador, Colombia, Uruguay is slowly going that way. And those are very high-stakes changes because many times passing or failing that exam will determine whether you will continue to have a job or not, right? And after they have ascertained the language level, then you move on to, do you know your methodology, right? And everything now is all the looks are being placed on the teacher again. Let's find what faults there are with the teachers. It's not about, let's get the teachers to work together and find out how they can improve one another, how they can build like support networks. And experiential learning is a way that I found particularly useful in dealing with situations like that. Why? Basically because it's not that I'm doing things on principle. And I'm gathering data as I do things so that I can show like, here it is what happened to me. Even if it is just a page from my learning log, from a personal diary. Or if I'm a little bit more systematic, and for statisticians, these are the numbers, right? And you know numbers never lie. You know that. Numbers are the truth, right? Statistically, you can have one foot in a bucket with boiling water and another one in a bucket of freezing water. Statistically, you are comfortable. But this is not just enough. We need another quality of Leonardos to keep us going and surviving. And the third characteristic is called sensazione. What is sensazione? Sensazione refers to a continual refinement of the senses, especially sight. Or if we want, that is for artists. For us, it would be a continual refinement of our perception in general, as a means to enliven experience. So it's not just having the experience, thinking about it, but really looking closely. In other words, in order to unpack our knowledge, and unpacking our knowledge also means acknowledging our own ignorance, which is important, right? And put it to the test of experience, we need to notice. Are you familiar with the concept of noticing? Well, just in case you're not familiar, I have a graphic representation here. There's a wonderful book published by Routledge, written by a guy called Mason, on the discipline of noticing. And he says basically, every practitioner in whatever domain they work wants to be awake to possibilities, to be sensitive to the situation and to respond appropriately. What is considered appropriate depends on what is valued, which in turn affects what is noticed. Thus, every act of caring and supporting depends on noticing. And he says, noticing is the first step, right? Noticing is like the aha moment. Oh, look at that. I didn't know that that was the case. But after noticing comes marking. And marking is critically appraising an aspect of what we noticed and actively working on that, right? Which leads us to another characteristic of Leonardo's thinking, right? Oh, sorry, before that. The ethical considerations. When we notice and mark something, we need to take sides, necessarily. We need to see which side of the fence we're standing, right? And many times that implies making ethical decisions, right? We know what ethics is, right? Characteristic, spirit of community, people, or system. I like to think that when we do this kind of noticing and we share it with peers, we can form some kind of Ubuntu. You know what Ubuntu is? It's a collective spirit, right? We tend to close our doors to the classroom and just be ourselves inside the classroom. I mean, in Uruguay at least, and in many places in the United States, I've heard teachers say, oh, I close the classroom door and the kids are mine, I do whatever I want with them, right? John Norrish has a wonderful saying. He says, there are 3 things that human beings do behind closed doors, and one of them is teaching. I want to use the word ethical with the true meaning of ethos to mean that noticing should become second nature to every teacher. And if you ever go to New York, go to the Metropolitan Museum and visit the Asian section, particularly Chinese. This is a Buddhist deity, and I have to read the name because I cannot remember it. It's Bodhisattva, and his name is Kannon, and he has 11 heads. Those 11 heads, and you can count them, you cannot see that very well, they are looking in every direction to make sure that there are no inequities in the world, right? And that is something we teachers should also do. Try to find out, as Freire used to say, whenever you do something, think about who am I doing this for, but also think about who am I doing this against, right? Because both are equally important. So, having considered these ethical considerations, let's move to what Leonardo was best at, this sfumato, right? You know that before Leonardo, paintings were beautiful. We cannot say they were not, but he created this technique called sfumato, right? One of his best known paintings, besides the Mona Lisa, which apparently now is not the Mona Lisa, we're going back to the old thing. Somebody proved it was the woman, now it's a man. But one of the other better known paintings by Leonardo is a portrait of Ginevra da Vinci, right? And to me, if you look at her, it's a beautiful painting, right? Why did Leonardo create sfumato for? Basically to add depth, right? Before him, and particularly throughout the Middle Ages, if you've ever seen medieval art, it's very flat. Very detailed, but very flat. And Leonardo did something very simple, very incredibly brilliant, is he would use the same palette he used in the main part of the painting and work on shades of that palette to add depth. And what looks like a wonderful landscape in the back is nothing but a collection of blurs of shades of the main palette of the painting. Look at this. You see? There are no clearly defined forms if we compare the main piece with the background. And that sfumato is also something that we need to do. We are in a profession that is always trying to find the truth. And this is the best way. And this is the way we do things. And when you teach reading, you make sure you do a pre, a while, and a post. When you teach language, think of what specific vocabulary, what specific grammar. We live from certainty to certainty, only to discover at the end of the year that we have a new certainty that contradicts a previous certainty. And guess what? We've had a group of students whom we taught through those certainties. Sfumato means, to me, embracing the possibility of what I'm doing is right, but it could be wrong, right? So it means taking a step further in my quest for understanding of who I am as an instructor, a teacher, a facilitator, a carer, whatever you want to define yourself as, right? Sfumato, you know, it means literally going up in smoke, right? And I like that metaphor. Also, in our profession, we do not tend to focus on the minute, the local, maybe because of the strong influence of statistical research. And I'm talking about education in general, right? What we get mostly is numbers. Very seldom do we focus on what we can call critical incidents, right? A critical incident need not be something very serious, but it could be an everyday thing. You are in your classroom and Mary, who's 8 years old, raises her hand. You look at her, she goes like this. And you just keep on teaching because you assume that she brought her hand down, she doesn't have a question, move on. Let's consider the possibilities. What could have happened to Mary? From a teacher with a big ego perspective, I have been very clear, she understood. She had a question which I managed to answer. But what if I look at, okay, Mary, I was looking at her, but I didn't see what other kids were doing. What if Mary is being bullied, and whenever she puts her hand up to ask, somebody's looking at her, right? Or what if Mary all of a sudden realized that the question she had was a stupid question? So what critical incidents help us do with the sfumato is basically make everything ambiguous. And once we make everything ambiguous, we are open to exploration because we are no longer thinking from A to B. We're thinking really laterally, considering possibilities. And I might enhance my teaching actually by talking to Mary after class and saying, hey, I noticed you put your hand up today and all of a sudden you brought it down. Did you have a question? And we've all been there when what the student responds is something that we don't expect. And it happened to me last Monday. I was teaching from here, from Buenos Aires, through video conference. I was teaching my students who were in New York. And I had a student who participated a lot. She was very happy. It was the first time doing a video conference lesson. It was as if I had been in my classroom with them, right? And then I just asked for an assessment. Hey guys, I have to teach them again next Monday. Give me something. How did this lesson work? And I was expecting a thumbs up from Joanne. And she wrote, Gabriel, please don't do this to me again. It was chaotic. I felt totally out of place. I kind of learned like that. I said, but you participated a lot. Yeah, but you were not there. You were not physically there. So what I assumed was a normal thing, all of a sudden turned into a big problem for me because I have to teach a group of 7 graduate students next Monday. And how am I going to do? I cannot just fly to New York because I'm going to be in South America, right? But that got me the whole week thinking about possibilities. And I'm testing out with them. I'm writing emails to them. What if we did discussion boards and maybe 15 minutes of Q&A online synchronously? That is what I mean by sfumato. Don't assume that whatever you do is good, even though the kids may be smiling and having fun, right? Because always consider and problematize your practice. There's a wonderful book by Tripp, and you will have the bibliography, and the handouts will be uploaded to the APIBA webpage Monday morning, I was told, and there you have the complete bibliography. It's a rather old book, 1993, but it gives you a discipline for creating critical incidents, which is very good. And Tripp, the writer, defines that critical incidents are obvious accounts of very commonplace events that occur in routine professional practice, which are critical in the rather different sense that they are indicative of underlying trends, motives, and structures. So let's stop for a minute and let's look at where we started from in this walk with Leonardo. We started by just being open to questioning ourselves, and we are going more and more deeply into refining the way we do things. Which brings us to the relationship between arte scienza, art and science, which to Leonardo was never a dichotomy. It was always a slash, 2 sides of the same coin, right? To adopt an arte scienza stance means to develop a balance between science and art, logic, imagination. In other words, it means using whole brain thinking, using the best parts of your brain, which are both, right? Excuse me. Need a little water. I talked about this in one of my presentations. To some people, the only thing that matters is practice. To others, the only thing that matters is theory. Like, Even in teacher education, you get these things like, oh, there's too much doing things in this class. Or there's too much theory, but how do I do it in the classroom? And that arte scienza perspective, I took 2 photographs once that I think epitomize what we could profit from, how we could profit from this, not dichotomy, but duality, right? You know, there are some planes that leave a trail, right? And the trail is very direct, something like this. And and what happens after that plane has flown by, we might get this kind of cloud, right? And to me, this represents the relationship between research with a capital R and research with a small case r. In other words, or in the words of Kessel and Korthagen, right? Kessel and Korthagen make a distinction between episteme and phronesis, right? Aristotle. Episteme is that theory with a capital T that has prestige because it has been codified, and it can be codified in books, in articles. It can be transmitted. It can be generalized. But let's be honest, most of the times that kind of research is not readily applicable to concrete situations, particularly in parts of the world where we don't have the funds to do local research. So we take to doing sort of research, exploring things, gathering some data, sharing it in conferences such as this. So our research is generally not considered this, but that, something diffuse. Also, of course, epistemologically, there's still the tension between the die-hard qualitative research against the die-hard quantitative against the qualitative. Now we have the methods, the mixed methods research perspective. How can we teachers profit from all that? First of all, there's so much information out there. There's so much coming out all the time. And I don't know who I was talking to the other day. And the person came and said like, oh, could you give me the reference for this? And I said, yeah. And then she looked at me and said, I don't know why I'm asking you this, because I won't have time to read it, right? But at least it's peace of mind, like my moral duty of asking for the reference was there, right? The whole thing is about generating teacher knowledge. And one thing that we need to start to realize is that the knowledge that is valid for a teacher in Argentina is not necessarily valid for a teacher in another context. Because knowledge is a product of an interaction of unique human beings in a certain time, in a certain space, and constrained by very particular circumstances, which cannot be reproduced. What you can aim at best is at understanding your situation. But that kind of research that cuts across the board and says that what works with immigrants in a country where English is the main language, and I'm not saying the only language, because no English-speaking country is any longer monolingual, even though they may want to think that they are, right? But what works in that situation cannot be replicated here, because we embody another reality, right? Yet, if you look at the methodology books that we use in teacher education, they all come from the North, from people who have started teaching and taught all their, or most of their lives in those monolingual situations. The ideas can be good, don't get me wrong. But what I'm also saying is, when are we going to start telling the world what we do? Many times we try to make an effort, and I know it's hard to publish. We've all been there. You send an article for consideration in a journal, and somehow it ends up at the bottom of the pile, right? Also, journals and quarterlies, they have gone down in the number of pages, and people tell you your article is good, but you have to wait for 2 years to get it published, right? Because we have other priorities. So how can we disseminate what we do? How can we make the second cloud expand even further? We have the internet. There are wonderful, wonderful free access online journals that are peer reviewed, that have a very quick turnover. If you send an article, They will send you feedback in 4 weeks, and after you send the feedback from 2 anonymous peers, you don't know who they are, they don't know who you are. And it's the same thing as in a normal journal, but because there's not the cost of printing and all those things, we can start to disseminate. And guess what? There's a wonderful one, which is called Encounters in Education. It's actually a Canadian journal. It's also called Encuentros en Educación. And it's published in 3 languages. You can publish in French, you can publish in English, you can publish in Spanish. And it's open access, right? And there you find examples of things that we are doing in Latin America. To me, this whole week has been an eternal discovery and ceaseless discovery of new perspectives and wonderful projects I had never heard of. But how often do I get to come here? I almost didn't make it, right? And the same thing may happen to you. So let's start sharing things a little bit more. I'm talking about embodying. One other characteristic of Leonardo is corporalità. I don't know how to translate this from Italian into English, but it's like embodying. Maybe it has to do with grace and dexterity and flexibility and nimbleness. To me, it's embracing the perspective that Donald Freeman advocates for, the teacher as researcher, teacher hyphen researcher, which he admits it's a history of 2 nouns divided by a hyphen, right? He admits that. But yes, going further from what we do every day in the classroom, the automatic application or replication of our habitus in the true sense of what a habitus is, right? Bourdieu. It's breaking away with that. The other day I mentioned John Fansalo, a dear old friend, and he's really, really old, poor John, but he's still very active and he's still preaching his gospel, which is change one thing. Dare to change one thing and see what happens, right? Corporalità, in this sense, coupled with all the other characteristics, gives more dimension to our reflection and to our experience. Reflecting as an individual is hard. Reflect with your peers. Bounce ideas from one another. And we are all always engaged in some sort of reflection. Griffiths and Tan talk about the different cycles of reflection we engage in our professional lives. If you read that quote, you will find yourself there. Maybe not in everything, but in one at least. And look at this. They talk about different levels. Rapid reflection. We all do that in the classroom. We make, I don't know how many thousands of decisions on the spur of the moment. There's repair reflection. Oops, put the foot in it, have to do it again. There's review, the concept closest to Schoen's reflection on action. There's research, of course, and there's re-theorizing, that change from the evidence that we gather. This is all in the handouts, by the way. So look at those characteristics. I dare you rank yourselves, and I'm sure that you have done at least 3 of these dimensions of reflection, haven't you? Because it's part of who we are as teachers, right? And the last one has to do with connessione, connections, right? Ideally, what I do in my classroom, if it is to benefit the system I work for, the society I work for, should not be constrained by the walls of my classroom and my students alone. This is a call, an invitation to cooperate more. And I'm going to use the metaphor of resonance, sorry. Oh, God. Are we speaking Spanglish? And yeah, it does it to you. It does it, right? Look at this picture. Do you know what that is? Now, this is a series of pictures taken by a teenage boy. He had a loudspeaker. He turned it upside down, and he threw some salt on the loudspeaker. The white is the salt, and the black is the loudspeaker. And then he started playing music. And look at what happens to the salt. It reorganizes in different shapes. And every shape is beautiful and unique. So what do I gain if I keep all the things that I do, all my reflection to myself? I might end up either like picture 1 or 2. Now, when I share my reflection, my research, if you don't want to call it research, my awareness raising, my elaboration of a critical incident, I share it with one person, it begins to resonate. And guess what? That will lead to that person sharing with another person, and so forth, so on. And then all of a sudden we have this resonance in the field. There's nothing to lose from taking the perspective, but I think there's a lot to gain, right? If we are a teacher researcher, we can achieve a lot of things, but we have to be faithful to ourselves, right? Do you know what painting that is? Do you know the artist first? Monet. Can you tell me what painting that is? It's this one. Japanese bridge over the pond with lilies. But Monet was going blind towards the end of his life. And the true impressionist he remained faithful to his principle. He painted what he saw. He remained honest. He didn't look back. And he really obsessed about that garden. He spent his life doing that. And if you ever see the water lilies paintings, they are as big, some of them are as long as this screen, because the more blind he was going, the bigger he painted, right? Just like Monet, we have to look at what we have today. We have to take into consideration where we're coming from, but the beauty is in what we see today, right? And stop thinking about those general truths that hold for decades. Because guess what? The times keep moving, and we're still stuck in the 80s. What would happen if we change? I think we have a jewel of an opportunity here for everybody, right? We all have stories of having to battle administrators, and I remember when the whole humanistic language teaching became popular in the 80s. I worked in a school that prepared students for international examinations. So a group of young, naive teachers, we came to a conference and we heard Gertrude Moscovitz about caring and sharing in the foreign language classroom. And we tried to do some of those things, and our boss heard. And boy, were we in trouble, right? But guess what? The students, after we stopped doing the crazy, funky stuff, the hippie stuff, the students went and complained, like, what did you tell my teachers that they stopped doing things that I was having fun and learning from? So never underestimate the power of one tiny change. If we change in this way, if we take a more disciplined approach to who we are and we become the true Leonardos that we are entitled to be, first of all, the benefit for your learners. They are going to have a more fruitful learning experience, right? And that cliche that a teacher touches eternity is true, right? It's true. Secondly, their families are going to profit from. Even if you call them and they never show up. Even if you complain that, oh yeah, this kid needs to, this is the support of the parents and they never show up. If we help the kid get a better place in the world, he will make a better place for his family as well. We saw it in Enrique's video yesterday. The beautiful examples of kids who had been totally ignored by society, and all of a sudden they are dreaming of a future. Of course, the profession will grow, right? And that is important as well. You are going to feel, yeah, I can do it. The Nike effect, as Mimi put it the other day. And we're going to gain back our respect as educators, right? Because we're going to be talking from a principled position, from evidence-based position. And of course, we will start building this pyramid that slowly, through the contribution of everyone around, will help us succeed a little bit more. But more importantly, we will be changing the future for ourselves, our students, and our countries. So my presentation today was intended as more than just sharing some alternative route to our future. I really want to make a call to action, right? Because, as Maya Angelou says, each of us has the responsibility to assess the roads that lie ahead of us. If the future looms ominous or unpromising, then we need to gather our resolve and step off in another direction. We have the key, so let's open the door.